if you had told me that years ago, I would have, my mind would have been.
Every time I go there, it's like a challenge for me, even though I love playing on clay and I feel really good, but it seems like...
Imagine being 20 years old, standing on a clay court in Mallorca, Spain, watching one of the greatest tennis minds in history break down your game shot by shot. Not as a fan watching from the stands. Not as a wildcard trainee sneaking a glimpse. But as his actual student, his project, the player he chose to invest his knowledge in after spending decades building the most dominant clay court career the sport has ever witnessed. That is exactly where Alex found herself in early April 2026, and honestly, when you hear her describe that moment in her own words, it hits different. She said if someone had told her this years ago, her mind would have been completely blown. And that reaction, that pure disbelief mixed with gratitude, tells you everything about how significant this moment actually is. Because Alex is not talking about just any coach. She is talking about Toni Nadal, the man who took a 4-year-old kid from Manacor and turned him into a 14-time French Open champion. The architect behind 22 Grand Slam titles. The tactical genius who built the greatest clay court dynasty the sport has ever seen, and who does not, by the way, just work with anyone. So when a guy with that resume looks at a 20-year-old Filipino girl ranked 46th in the world and decides she is worth his time, you stop and you pay attention. And here is where it gets even more interesting, because Aryna Sabalenka, the world number one, the woman who entered 2026 absolutely on fire with 23 wins, 1 loss and 3 titles already in the bag, she heard about what was happening in Mallorca and she did not laugh it off or dismiss it. She called Alex something special. Not promising. Not a player to watch. Special. That word from that person about a player still fighting to crack the top 30 is not casual. That is the number one in the world sending a signal that she sees something real developing, and it started a conversation across the entire WTA that has not stopped since. To understand why this all matters so much, you have to go back a little bit, because Alex's journey to that Mallorca court did not happen overnight and it was not handed to her. She has been grinding through the junior ranks and the lower-tier professional circuit for years, building her game piece by piece, showing flashes of brilliance that kept everyone watching but had not yet translated into the kind of consistent results that shake up the rankings. Joan Bosch has been her main coach, the person who has guided her development and knows her game inside out, and that relationship is not changing. But what happened in early April was that Toni Nadal was brought into the setup as an additional voice, a tactical layer that brings something almost impossible to replicate. Because Toni does not just coach tennis. He engineers players. He builds mental frameworks and movement patterns and strategic habits that transform how a player thinks about every single point, every single rally, every single moment under pressure. And the surface he understands better than anyone alive is clay. Red clay specifically, the slow, grinding, punishing surface that exposes every weakness and rewards patience, physicality, and tactical intelligence above everything else. The same surface that Alex now needs to master if she is going to take the next serious step in her career. The footage coming out of the Rafael Nadal Academy during that training block was something else. Toni on court, watching Alex work through drills, adjusting her positioning, breaking down her movement patterns. There is a reason that Academy exists where it does, built on the same red dirt where Rafa logged thousands of hours becoming the player he became, and now those same courts are being used to shape the next generation. You watch that footage and you feel the weight of it, this generational transfer of knowledge happening right in front of you, and Alex standing in the middle of it trying to absorb everything she can. She described it as just a great experience overall, which is probably the most understated way you could possibly describe getting personal tactical coaching from Toni Nadal, but that humility is also part of who she is. She is not performing for the cameras. She is working. And then the clay season arrived and it was time to see whether any of it actually translated. The Upper Austria Ladies Tournament in Linz, the first clay event of her 2026 season, just days after that Mallorca training block ended. Round 1, Alex versus Julia Grabher, a local player with home crowd energy and a game that suits clay conditions. On paper it looked like a manageable opener, but clay has a way of turning every match into something deeply uncomfortable, especially in round 1 when your legs are still finding the surface and the crowd is buzzing for the opponent right across the net from you. Alex won 6-4, 6-3. Straight sets, clean result. But if you just look at the scoreline you miss the actual story of that match, which was what happened every single time she faced a breakpoint. 10 times Grabher had opportunities to take a game from Alex. 9 times, Alex held. 9 out of 10 breakpoints saved, which on clay under crowd pressure, in your first match of the season, is the kind of statistic that makes coaches and analysts stop and rewind. That is not talent in the moment. That is drilled behavior. That is weeks of someone hammering into your head that when the pressure comes you do not panic, you execute. You trust your movement, you trust your patterns, you trust the process. And you could hear Toni Nadal's influence in every one of those holds even if he was not on the court. The tournament atmosphere around her matches was something officials described as unlike anything they had seen from a player outside the top 40. Filipino fans had traveled to Linz and filled sections of the venue, social media was running hot with predictions and comparisons, and the broader tennis world was starting to tune in to what was happening around this 20-year-old who had just spent 2 weeks training with the greatest clay coach in history. That energy matters more than people sometimes acknowledge because it creates a gravitational pull around a player, it brings cameras and commentary and attention creates pressure, which is exactly the environment where you find out what a player is actually made of. Alex handled all of it. She won her opening match, thanked her supporters in Tagalog, and kept her focus exactly where Toni would want it, on the next match, the next challenge, the next opportunity to prove the work was real. Round of 16, and the draw gave her Yelena Ostapenko.
Former French Open champion. Top 20 player.
A woman who beat Sabalenka herself on clay last year and who plays the kind of explosive, unpredictable game that gives everyone problems regardless of ranking or surface.
Alex lost.
6-4-7-5 in straight sets, no dramatic comeback, no stolen set. A clean defeat to a legitimately dangerous player. And here is the thing about that result that most people either missed or misread. Losing to Ostapenko in week 1 of the clay season, days after a coaching transition, in your first competitive matches on the surface you are trying to rebuild your game around, is not a crisis. It is information. It tells you where you are, what still needs work, what the gap looks like between where you stand today and where you need to be by the time Roland Garros arrives. And the way Alex handled that loss was more revealing than the loss itself. No excuses, no dramatic post-match spiral, just clear acknowledgement that the level needs to rise and a visible commitment to the process that gets her there. That is Toni Nadal's mentality. That is the same stoic forward-facing approach that Rafa demonstrated for 2 decades every single time he faced a setback, and watching Alex channel it at 20 years old is one of the more quietly extraordinary things happening in tennis right now. Let's talk about Sabalenka for a second because her role in this story is fascinating and a little underappreciated. She entered 2026 as arguably the most dominant player on tour. 23 wins against a single loss. 3 titles before April even arrived. 11,000 ranking points that put an almost absurd distance between her and the rest of the field. When you are operating at that level, you do not need to pay attention to a player ranked 46th. You do not need to issue public statements about players who are not yet in your immediate orbit. You could just keep winning and let the results speak for themselves. But Sabalenka went out of her way to call Alex something special, and she added that every time she faces a player like that it feels like a challenge even when she loves the surface and feels good on it. She is a Filipino player who brings something different, something that cannot quite be categorized or dismissed. And you have to understand what Sabalenka is actually doing when she says that. She is not being generous for the cameras. She is a competitor to her core, and competitors of that level only acknowledge threats they genuinely see forming. She watched what happened in Mallorca. She heard about Toni Nadal joining the team. She understood exactly what it means when the man who engineered Rafa's clay court dominance decides to invest his expertise in a young player with Alex's physical tools and competitive hunger. Sabalenka is not worried in the way that disrupts her focus. She is aware in the way that champions stay aware, tracking what is developing on the horizon so nothing catches them by surprise. The bigger picture here, the one that extends beyond tournament results and rankings and even individual coaching partnerships, is about what Alex represents for tennis as a whole. The Philippines is not traditionally thought of as a tennis powerhouse. Southeast Asia has historically operated on the fringes of the sport's mainstream conversation, celebrating occasional moments but not sustaining the kind of pipeline that produces consistent top-level talent. What is happening with Alex right now is different in kind, not just degree. She is not a feel-good story about a player from an unexpected background making it onto the tour. She is a player from an unexpected background who is now connected to the very heart of European tennis infrastructure, training at the Rafa Nadal Academy, working with Toni Nadal, competing at the highest level of the WTA and being acknowledged by the world #1 as a genuine force to be reckoned with. That pipeline, that direct line between Manila and Mallorca, between Southeast Asian tennis development and the most sophisticated clay court coaching operation in the world, is something that did not exist 5 years ago and might reshape how the region approaches player development going forward. Alex is not just playing for herself at this point. Whether she chooses that weight or not, she is carrying the proof of concept that this kind of pathway is real and that it can produce results that matter.
Madrid is coming. Rome is coming.
And then Roland Garros, the biggest clay court tournament in the world, the one that Toni Nadal won 14 times as a coach, the one where everything Alex has been building toward will face its most serious examination. Each tournament between now and Paris is a data point, A chance for the work done in Mallorca to be tested against the best players on tour on the surface that demands everything from you physically and mentally. The trajectory matters as much as the results. Is she moving better by Rome than she was in Linz? Is her decision-making sharper? Is the tactical framework Toni installed starting to feel instinctive rather than deliberate? Those are the questions that will tell the real story of what this partnership can produce. Toni Nadal does not take on coaching roles for the attention or the titles it might add to a resume that already has nowhere left to go. He does it because he sees something worth building, and he chose Alex. A 20-year-old from the Philippines ranked 46th in the world with a game that clearly has dimensions still being unlocked, with a competitiveness that showed itself clearly in Linz even in defeat, with a connection to a fanbase that travels internationally just to watch her play and screams in Filipino in the middle of Austrian tennis venues because she gives them something to believe in. That is the kind of player you build a project around. That is the kind of story that does not peak in April. It unfolds across a season, across years, across a career that is only just starting to understand its own ceiling. So here is where we actually are right now. The man who built the greatest clay player in history is working with Alex. The world number one has publicly acknowledged she is something different. The clay season is open and 3 of the biggest tournaments on the calendar are right in front of her. She is 20 years old and she is just getting started. And if you think back to what she said standing in Mallorca, if you had told me this years ago my mind would have been blown, you realize that is the most honest thing anyone could say in that moment. Because what is happening is genuinely extraordinary. Not because the ranking is about to jump 50 places overnight. Not because Roland Garros is guaranteed. But because the pieces are in place in a way they have never been before, and the player holding them is hungry enough and grounded enough and talented enough to actually do something with them. The blow has landed. The blueprint exists. And this clay season is where we find out what it can build.